What bad trade is your favorite NFL team guilty of making? With this video, we're going to look at the worst trade that every NFL team has made. I excluded trade-ups in the draft, with one exception, as that will be an entirely different video. A lot of these trades, draft picks were traded, but if it was a trade specifically for a team to trade up in the draft to draft someone, I'm mostly going to consider it ineligible. We're mainly looking at established NFL players who were the centerpiece in a fleecing, whether that team gave it up and lost, or whether that team acquired the player and lost. We're going to look at every asset of the trade. How did each team fare after the trade? How lopsided was the trade? Basically, this video is just every team's most lopsided trade, but in a bad way. They were on the bad side of the lopside. Is that a word? Anyway, let's get started. The Arizona Cardinals' worst trade was their trade for QB Kevin Kolb. The Cardinals have made a lot of QB mistakes over the years. Trading up for Josh Rosen in 2018, thinking Matt Leinart would replicate his college production in the NFL, thinking Kyler Murray didn't daydream every single day about playing for the D-backs. Which, speaking of D-backs, that's what it took for the Cardinals to get a mediocre and injury-prone QB, Kevin Kolb. Kevin Kolb was a guy whose draft selection in 2007 was booed mercilessly by Eagles fans. Turns out, unlike a scenario where they think they can climb a light pole without suffering a spine injury, Eagles fans were able to tell the future. Kevin Kolb was very mediocre in the limited playing time he had with the Eagles, but that didn't stop the Cardinals from trading a Pro Bowl cornerback and a second-round pick to get him. Kevin Kolb made 14 starts and went 6-8 in those starts. He also posted a TD to interception ratio of 17-15, and he retired after the 2014 season due to concussion concerns. Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie, he was a second-team All-Pro 2 years after Kevin Kolb retired, while the Cardinals struggled with quarterback instability until the twilight years of Carson Palmer took place. The Atlanta Falcons' worst trade, I actually made an upset pick here, was their trade for quarterback Jeff George. Quite frankly, I should put the Brett Favre trade here, but I don't want to talk about him in a positive light. That said, Jeff George was an undoubtedly talented QB, even though he didn't live up to the expectations that he had when the Colts took him with the first overall pick in 1990. His biggest undoing was inconsistency and also the fact that he was a giant gaping asshole. That said, didn't stop the Falcons from pining for him. With that, the Colts and the Falcons made a trade. The Colts acquired the 7th and the 83rd overall picks in the 1994 draft, in addition to a 1996 first-round pick from the Falcons in exchange for Jeff George. The Colts later used the 1994 picks they got to trade up from 7 to 5, where they would select linebacker Trev Alberts. I guess because 2 years after trading Brett Favre, they're like, hey, what if we had a quarterback that is just as big of an asshole, but not nearly as talented? Jeff George went 16-19 in 2+ seasons before going 0-3 in 1996, before he got into an argument with head coach June, not E.B. Jones. Even though Jones later claimed it was overblown, George never played a snap with the Falcons. The Colts, like I said earlier, they used their first-round pick on linebacker Trev Alberts, which Mel Kiper famously disagreed with. And while that pick led to an injury-riddled career for Trev Alberts, their 1996 first-round pick, he's a Hall of Famer. The Baltimore Ravens' worst trade was when they traded away Anquan Boldin. Anquan Boldin was just as instrumental to the Ravens' Super Bowl run in 2013 as the concept of a power outage. With that, the Ravens rewarded him in the best way possible by asking him to take a pay cut. The Ravens, who were not an expansion team, were like, we need to pay people. And he's like, what? I just had 22 receptions for 380 yards and 4 touchdowns in the playoffs. And they're like, man, wild that you remember that off the top of your head. And he's like, yeah, I'm trying to negotiate. But then Boldin refused to take a pay cut, and the Ravens ended up dealing him to the 49ers for a 6th-round pick. Boldin himself was a cap casualty for the Ravens, and then he went to the 49ers and immediately posted back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. The 6th-round round pick they got in the 2013 draft, and all its mid-glory was used to trade up for a linebacker in the second round who had 20 career tackles. The Buffalo Bills' worst trade was trading 2 draft picks for QB Rob Johnson. The post-Jim Kelly era provided no stability for the Bills, which is concerning that 4 Super Bowl losses in a row is what they consider stability. They thought they found it by trading for Jags QB Rob Johnson, who up to that point had 1 career start. Instead, he went 11-17 through parts of 4 seasons, and he never totaled more than 4 wins in a year. He was the quarterback who controversially started the Music City Miracle game over Nugenics commercial mainstay Doug Flutie. That quarterback choice was one of 2 reasons why that game was famous for a lateral move. By the way, it was a lateral. Now, that first-round pick they gave up wasn't just any first-round pick. It was a 9th overall pick, and they gave that up for Rob Johnson, who had 4,798 passing yards for the Bills. Now, as long as the player taken with that 9th overall pick didn't have over 11,000 rushing yards with the team that drafted him, I'd be perfectly okay with, "You've got to be kidding me!" 4th-rounder Tavian Banks didn't amount to much. Meanwhile, Fred Taylor's career outlasted the Bills' career of Rob Johnson and J.P. Lossman. The Carolina Panthers' worst trade, again, controversial choice here, was when they sent 2 compensatory picks to Washington for defensive tackle Sean Gilbert. Even if Bryce Young pans out, still kind of an honorable mention because of the no trade-ups rule, which again, I'm going to break once later. Bryce Young isn't objectively terrible, but he's not doing impeccable work, and the Bears got a #1 overall pick out of it, which they used to select Caleb Williams. So that right there automatically makes it a net loss for the Panthers. Now again, this isn't technically a trade, kind of is, as like I said, Carolina gave those picks as compensation for signing defensive tackle Sean Gilbert from Washington. Gilbert spent the entire 1997 season in a holdout with Washington, and as a result, he sat out for the entire year. And as we all know, players who have extensive holdouts are the ones who always pan out. So good job, Carolina, with doing your due diligence. Sean Gilbert spent 5 lackluster career twilight seasons with the Panthers, starting for essentially 3.5 seasons. His career wound down, but unfortunately for the Panthers, they were winding up his bank account in the process. And Sean Gilbert was released after the 2002 season, but not before the Panthers watched just up north as Washington turned those 2 first-round picks into a 6-time Pro Bowl offensive tackle and one of the greatest cornerbacks in NFL history. I mean, just think if they had given away their 1997 first rounder, they wouldn't have had to write PR statements about Ray Caruth. The Chicago Bears' worst trade was trading a first-round pick for Rick Mirer. Man, people really love trading first-round picks for duds, don't they? Rick Mirer was woefully underwhelming in his several-season stint with the Seattle Seahawks. But that doesn't mean the Bears were willing to give up on their dream for a 4,000-yard passer. Instead, they gave up a beautiful first-round pick for Rick Mirer, who spent 1 season in Chicago, and he had 1 touchdown, which came via rushing. Eric Kramer was the Bears starter anyway, so basically the Seahawks just got a get-out-of-jail-free card. Mirer spent 1 season in Chicago before signing with Green Bay, which you know you suck as a player when you look at your team's most hated rival and go, "You can have him." Now, I have to acknowledge the Mitch Trubisky trade as well. No, he was not the guy in Chicago, but he also wasn't as bad as people thought he was. The pick the Bears gave up for Rick Mirer was used to trade up to the 3rd pick in the 1997 draft, and that pick was used on cornerback Sean Springs, who had a very above-average 13-season career. For Rick Mirer, he bounced around the league so much, his name should have been Springs. I'll be here all week. The Cincinnati Bengals' worst trade was trading back in the first round and acquiring Cordy Glenn. The Bengals making a poor move for an offensive lineman? Who would have known? Also, not so fun fact, this is not the only poor move they made on an offensive lineman in this trade alone. Now, why are you saying Cordy Glenn? Why not a bigger trade? I know this team. They don't take big swings on trades. Cordy Glenn was a reliable left tackle for the Bills, but Buffalo was ready for its franchise quarterback. They traded Cordy Glenn to the Bengals, who were essentially rebuilding and coming off of lifting the Bills into the playoffs. The Bengals traded back with the Bills and selected Billy Price in the first round, who sucked. The Bills? Well, they used that 12th overall pick, packaged some other picks, traded up to 7, and got Josh Allen in the draft. Josh Allen became extremely proven and the do-it-all QB that Buffalo needed. Cordy Glenn and Billy Price, meanwhile, they were off the team in pretty much no time. The only saving grace of this trade for the Bengals was the Bengals traded Billy Price to the New York Giants, in exchange for B.J. Hill. Now, before I roast the Deshaun Watson trade into smithereens, if you like what you've seen so far, click the like button and subscribe to the channel. Numbers have been doing really well, and a lot of you were really kind about my last video, even though I made some very obvious mistakes. Whoopsie! I appreciate all you for tuning in, I appreciate all you guys for subscribing, and we'd love to have you around for more. I appreciate you guys for getting these videos out there. But for now, back to the video. The Cleveland Browns' worst trade. Come on. Deshaun Watson, a quarterback whose top 2 Pornhub searches are woman gives massage and woman honors non-disclosure agreement, was coming off of a major sexual assault fiasco. Houston basically wanted nothing to do with their once prized franchise quarterback, and Cleveland was like, the best I can do is 3 first-round picks and a bunch of others. And it was so. The Browns finally had their franchise guy after giving up on Baker Mayfield, or so they thought. The Browns gave Deshaun Watson a gnarly 5-year, $230 million fully guaranteed contract. They were set to go to the promised land, only to find out he sucks now. Deshaun Watson has spent 4 up and down injury-plagued seasons in Cleveland so far, which proves he still has an affinity for ass play. Thank you. All the Texans did, they built the core of their team with that trade. They did have some misses, like Kenyon Green and the non-rookie version of Dameon Pierce. But a lot of their draft picks were massive home runs. Tank Dell, Dynamo, who is also Tiny Mo when he's healthy. Kamari Lassiter, swinging for the fences. Will Anderson Jr., get out the rye bread and mustard, grandma. The Dallas Cowboys' worst trade was trading 3 draft picks in exchange for Roy Williams. It's too soon to talk about the Parsons trade. Probably is going to end up on this list somewhere, but as of now, it's too soon. Roy Williams was one of 3 wide receivers that the Lions took with the top 10 draft pick between 2003 and 2005. Roy Williams was far and away the best of the 3, as he was sandwiched in between the late Charles Rogers and Mike Williams. No, try again. No, wrong guy. No, wrong guy. That's Mike Will made it. That's Jillian Michaels. There we go. Drafting 3 first-round wide receivers was never going to be a good long-term plan. The Lions were in the midst of an awful season in which they finished 0-16. Jerry Jones, who only admits his super genius ideas are bad well after he makes them, thought that Roy Williams was the missing piece of his offense. He swiped Williams from Detroit and gave them 3 picks in the very next draft, including a first-round pick. He then immediately gave Roy Williams a contract extension that was so bad, it's not even the first result when you Google Roy Williams contract extension Dallas Cowboys. This trade actually has the rare distinction of being a lose-lose trade. The Cowboys squandered away depth for a receiver they didn't really need, especially after Miles Austin broke out and Dez Bryant came into town. Who did the Lions get with their picks? Another receiver named Williams, who never caught a touchdown, a running back who was best suited returning kicks, and Guy Alert. Brandon Pettigrew. The Denver Broncos' worst trade was their trade for Russell Wilson.
Broncos country, let's ride.
Alex. Oh, my bad. We're doing a video. Russell Wilson was the Seahawks quarterback for 10 seasons, but things were falling apart pretty fast. Russell Wilson disapproved of coaches that got fired. He reportedly wanted former head coach Pete Carroll and current GM John Schneider fired, which Russell Wilson later denied on Twitter. Seattle then shipped him off to the Broncos, with Russell Wilson waiving his no-trade clause after Denver told him he'd get his own office, which I'll get to later. Seattle sent over Russell Wilson and a 4th-round pick. In exchange, the Seahawks got 3 players, 2 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks, and a 5th-round pick. Broncos fans were fired up. Their fans felt they were a QB away from a Super Bowl, but as it turns out, they were a bad QB mega contract away from being in a terrible situation. The Broncos were largely disappointing, and Russell Wilson couldn't replicate the success that he had in Seattle. In his 2 years in Denver, he went 11-19, including a disgusting 4-11 in his first year. In that first year, had 16 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, and an alleged QB whisperer of a coach coach who was basically just Josh McDaniels without the visor. He also upset his teammates by being adamant about having his own office. And that office was exactly what you think it was. It was constantly airing the NFL Network with the occasional Sierra music video. It also had motivational and inspirational quotes as far as the eye can see. The Broncos hired Sean Payton as head coach the very next season, and even though Wilson and the Broncos improved from their disastrous 2022, it didn't result in their playoff expectations coming to fruition. Russell Wilson was benched for the final 2 games, and he was released after the year was over. The Broncos essentially rolled out the red carpet for Russell Wilson, and he was at the forefront of a disappointing atmosphere in return. The Seahawks, of course they used that draft capital to form their Super Bowl winning roster. Charles Cross, Boye Mafe, Devin Witherspoon, Derek Hall. Now, thankfully, the Broncos are back on track after getting rid of the Russell Wilson contract and having Bo Chapman as their franchise quarterback. I maintain Bo Chapman is a fantastic country musician name. The Detroit Lions' worst trade was trading Bobby Lane for Earl Morrall and 2 draft picks. Bobby Lane was a superstar. Bobby Lane was an NFL tough guy. He was also a ravaging drunk, which the NFL frowned upon until the 2010s when Gronk made it adorable. He also, fun fact, was originally drafted by the Pittsburgh Steelers, but he didn't want to play for them. Bobby Lane instead played for the Lions in the 50s, who were dominant largely because of their alcoholic quarterback. He was a 2-time first-team All-Pro, a 4-time second-team All-Pro, and 8-time guy who needs a ride home at the end of the night. Nevertheless, the Lions were tired of picking up his bar tabs, so they sent him to Pittsburgh, who always find it endearing when their quarterbacks are drunken slobs. Their fans are like, oh my god, no way, us too! In return, they got Earl Morrall, who was primarily a backup in the 6.5 seasons that he played in Detroit, and they couldn't replicate the success with Earl Morrall that they had with Bobby Lane. Once Bobby Lane was traded, he was attributed to a quote where he said the Lions would be cursed for 50 years, and while that quote wasn't verified, the curse of Bobby Lane was born. Anytime the Lions lose a big game, they blame the curse of Bobby Lane. You know, not the mismanagement or terrible coaching or the not modernizing or drafting like or hiring a color commentator as their CEO and GM, or even the fact that they had 2 of their star players retire in their primes. No, it's the curse of Bobby Lane. Sports curses are bullshit. Yeah, the fact that they wanted to get rid of a drunk superstar in the 50s is why they can't win now. The curse of Bo Jackson is real, and I will not be told otherwise. The Green Bay Packers' worst trade was trading several draft picks for QB John Hadl. The Packers have been an organization with long-standing stability at quarterback. Aaron Rodgers, Bart Starr, the volleyball arena scam artist guy, Jordan Love kind of. But did you know the Packers once took a massive swing for an aging veteran QB? And that acquisition turned out to be the worst move they've ever made. And Hadl did have some significant career accolades, but none of those accolades came in Titletown. John Hadl spent 1.5 ill-fated seasons in Green Bay and posted a TD to interception ratio of 9 to 29. He took 35 sacks, which was 5th in the NFL that year. After 1.5 seasons, he was out. The Rams, meanwhile, turned those picks into core pieces, the most important of which was Hall of Famer Jackie Slater. The Packers, meanwhile, had limited draft capital after this trade, but they were still able to draft Joe Burrow's daddy.
They drafted the Cleveland Browns?
Knock it off! The Houston Texans' worst trade was trading DeAndre Hopkins to the Arizona Cardinals. The trade that got Bill O'Brien launched into the sun. Remember when Bill O'Brien was the head coach and GM and he didn't want to pay DeAndre Hopkins? Oh, I sure do. And given those 2 factors, DeAndre Hopkins was sent off to the desert, where Bill O'Brien also should have been sent. Fans were rightfully dumbfounded. What the f***? He was arguably the best wide receiver in the NFL at the time, and he was traded for a running back who stopped being good 3 seasons after his career began. I can't explain it. The Cardinals got a prime DeAndre Hopkins, dumped David Johnson's salary, and gave a 2nd-round pick to the Texans that would be used on a defensive tackle with 3 career sacks. Not to mention, this is right before Deshaun Watson's time in Houston was winding down due to some controversy. When asked what it was like to watch his #1 target be traded to another team, Watson was quoted as saying, "Normally I liked being stripped of things, but not like this." DeAndre Hopkins was immediately a 2nd-team All-Pro and a Pro Bowler with the Cardinals. While he was only a Cardinal for 3 seasons, his impact was immediate, and the void left in Houston by his departure was pretty immense. The Indianapolis Colts' worst trade was their trade for Trent Richardson. Carson Wentz, you get a pass here. Somehow. The Colts heard that a running back selected 3rd overall 18 months prior was available for a trade, and they were like, that's not a red flag at all. How does a first-round pick sound? Good? Perfect. In Cleveland, Trent Richardson was relied upon pretty heavily, but he wasn't explosive. He had a fine rookie season with plenty of volume, but he struggled for the same reason the Browns themselves do, because of their terrible vision. He missed open running lanes constantly. The Browns saw that problem immediately, based on film review and based on the fact that on draft night, he was on stage wearing glasses. So the Colts gave the Browns a first-round pick because they also have terrible vision, I guess. With that draft pick, the Browns traded up to the 22nd overall pick in the 2014 NFL draft to select the second biggest Browns bust in the 2014 draft, Johnny Manziel. In case I wasn't clear enough, Johnny Manziel was the second biggest bust in the 2014 draft for the Browns. That's right, Justin Gilbert, who was taken 8th overall by the Browns that year, was so bad, some of you are hearing his name for the first time right now. I mean, of course a college QB is going to be good when he runs for his life until he lobs up a prayer, and college Mike Evans is there to bail him out. This may end up being a lose-lose trade. But if things go the way they continue to go, a certain somebody from a certain trade that happened this past season may end up overtaking Trent Richardson on this list. The Jacksonville Jaguars' worst trade was trading Jalen Ramsey to the Rams. Jalen Ramsey was a top talent in the NFL at cornerback in his heyday. His affinity for making incredible plays was well known, but he was also quite the smack talker. Am I saying that just because he got Jamar Chase to hawk Tua all over his jersey? Well, that's just a small part of it. Jalen Ramsey disagreed with the Jaguars. He fought with Doug Marrone on the sideline, and these are tough things to do right before you're about to earn a big contract extension. As talented and elite of a player as he was, things just fizzled out. As a result, the Jags were like, hey, we need to get rid of this guy. Who hates their first-round picks with the pet Rams? The Los Angeles FM picks sent over 2 first-round picks and a 4th-round pick in exchange for Jalen Ramsey. The Jags continued their decline, and it bottomed out, though I would have paid good money to watch Urban Meyer and Jalen Ramsey duke it out. The Rams? Yeah, we don't talk about that. The Kansas City Chiefs' worst trade was trading defensive tackle Curly Culp to the Oilers. This one was surprisingly tough. I could go with the Jared Allen trade, but 2 of the picks they got in return became Pro Bowlers, including Jamal Charles. I also could go with the Tony Gonzalez trade, but that was a trade that more or less needed to happen, as Gonzalez was disgruntled and he was looking for a fresh start. And the return package made sense at the time. But in the mid-1970s, Curly Culp was a dominant force for the Chiefs. That said, he wanted more money to the point that he threatened to sign a contract with the World Football League. They were worried they were going to lose him, and they didn't want to pay him. As a result, the Chiefs traded Curly Culp and a draft pick that was used on Robert Brazile, who was a linebacker. Robert Brazile, by the way, his nickname was Dr. Doom. Curly and Dr. Doom sounds like an incredible sitcom. The Chiefs got 2 seasons out of 2s, but the Oilers got 2 Hall of Famers. The Raiders' worst trade was trading Randy Moss for a 4th-round pick. The 2007 NFL draft for the Raiders might be the single worst draft any team has ever had. It was headlined by #1 overall pick and bottle of Throdeine syrup himself, Jamarcus Russell. Now, before I go any further, there was a trade in the 2007 draft where San Francisco traded back into the 1st round to draft Joe Staley. They acquired the 28th pick in the 2007 draft, and in exchange, New England acquired a 2008 first-round pick and a 2007 4th-round pick. Now here's where the Raiders come in. The Raiders were looking to move on from Randy Moss. He wasn't performing well, he wasn't happy, and he was getting paid an awful lot of money to be unhappy. The Pats had just gotten a 4th-round pick from the 49ers, so they were like, how does that work? And they're like, Sure, who cares? The Raiders used that 4th-round draft pick on defensive back John Bowie, go Bearcats, who played in 5 career games and had 2 career tackles. Randy Moss went on to revitalize his career with the Patriots, where in 3.5 seasons he had 50 touchdowns. The Carson Palmer trade for a 2012 first and a 2013 is honorable mention, as those picks turned into serviceable starters Dre Kirkpatrick and Giovanni Bernard. But when you give up a Hall of Fame receiver and get nothing in return, that's both a testament to a poor organization and a bad trade in general. The Chargers' worst trade, it's exception time, was their trade up for Ryan Leaf. Now here's my one exception to that rule. A, because there weren't a lot of horrible trades that the Chargers have made, and Ryan Leaf was technically the centerpiece of this deal. Well, him or whoever they didn't pick between him and Peyton Manning. The Chargers needed a quarterback really badly. Stan Humphries had just retired due to concussion concerns. So the Chargers were like, hey, this one guy from Washington State's really good. I know he needs to remove 2 of his ribs to talk about how good he thinks he is, but the arm talent is there. Did he get such a strong arm by stroking his own ego for years on end? Probably, but who cares? He has arm talent. The Chargers originally had the 3rd pick, and the Cardinals originally had the 2nd pick. The Chargers then traded to the Cardinals. 3rd pick, the 33rd pick, a 1999 first rounder, and 2 players in order to get Ryan Leaf. The 1998 first rounder was used on Andre Wadsworth, who has the most defensive end name I've ever heard. The 1999 first rounder was used on David Boston, who had 4 really up and down seasons with the Cardinals. Ryan Leaf, I think you know the rest. The Rams' worst trade was giving Jerome Bettis to the Steelers. Jerome Bettis was an incredibly talented and likable player, but things just weren't working out for him and the Rams. The Rams are looking to give him up, and the final 2 suitors were the Steelers, whose head coach Bill Cowher loved him, and the Oilers, who didn't get him, but they ended up with Eddie George, so decent consolation prize. While the Rams later ended up with Marshall Faulk, things were brutal until he got there. The Rams' replacement plan for Bettis was 1996 6th overall pick Lawrence Phillips, whose talent was huge, but his demons were huger. He was in bars late all the time. He had alcohol in his breath at practices. Phillips was gone after a season and a half, after which he was traded to the alcohol in your breath capital of the East Coast, Miami, Florida. The Rams shipped off Jerome Bettis and a 3rd rounder for a 2nd round pick and a 4th rounder. Jerome Bettis gave the Steelers a formidable rushing attack throughout the late 90s and early 2000s. The Rams ended up with very little other than starting-ish level starters. Which, speaking of Miami, Florida, the Miami Dolphins' worst trade was acquiring Dante Culpepper for a 2nd-round pick. Dante Culpepper was a real clear choice for this one. He was disgruntled in Minneapolis, and he was coming off of an injury-prone and scandal-laced season. The Dolphins, meanwhile, needed a new quarterback and were waffling on the open market between Dante Culpepper and Drew Brees, and they chose the Love Boat guy. This isn't just about what the Dolphins got. This is more about what the Dolphins could have had. They could have had several years of Drew Brees, who turned out to be more than healed from the shoulder injury he suffered, and he went on to have a Hall of Fame career for the Saints, who badly needed a reboost after the damage from Hurricane Katrina. Which it is kind of funny to picture an alternate universe where the Dolphins signed Drew Brees and the Saints acquired Dante Culpepper. I mean, FEMA would have had to help New Orleans recover from 2 disasters. At the time, then Dolphins head coach Nick Saban was all about Dante Culpepper's ceiling. He liked his bigger arm. He thought he was more recovered from injury than Drew Brees was. Unfortunately, Culpepper's time didn't go well, and he frequently clashed with the coaching staff. Culpepper started 4 games, threw 2 touchdowns, and was off the Dolphins after only 1 season. The Minnesota Vikings' worst trade was trading Randy Moss to the Raiders. Teams often get tired of superstars, no matter how good they are, especially if they're a pain in the ass. Randy Moss had ever so steadily declined throughout his several seasons in Minneapolis, and they shipped him off to the Raiders. The Vikings got a 7th overall pick from the Raiders, which they used on wide receiver Troy Williamson. Because if the Raiders have anything to do with the 1st-round pick, it's gonna be used on a speedy receiver who sucks. Yes, I did use that joke in a previous video, and I'm using it again just to show how much I stand by it. Now, I know Randy Moss's time in Oakland didn't go so well, but Troy Williamson's time in Minneapolis featured several coaching clashes and no hands, and he waka flocka flamed out of Minneapolis Dallas after 3 seasons. The New England Patriots' worst. You didn't think I was going to overlook that trade, did you? Let's do a little 2-for-1 for the Minnesota Vikings. How about the Herschel Walker trade? Hey Alex, why'd you put those 2 trades in the order you did? Well, it's pretty simple, because putting the trades in this order in the video was way funnier to me. The trade that gave Jerry Jones a reason to believe that he's legendary. Now, before I explore the trade, let's go over what the trade was. It was 4 defensive players, a first, a second, and a 6th round pick in 1990, a first and a second in 1991, and a first, second, and 3rd round pick in 1992. The Cowboys used a lot of those picks to find the core of their 1990s Netflix documentary. The Cowboys used those draft picks to find the core of their 1990s dynasty roster. Emmitt Smith, Russell Maryland, Kevin Smith, Clayton Holmes. Unfair list of players. The Vikings, meanwhile, got 2.5 seasons out of Hirsch, and they never got more than 825 rushing yards in a season out of him. Herschel's time in Minnesota was so short, the Cowboys hadn't even used all the draft picks they got for him to that point. Herschel Walker would even return to the Cowboys in 1996. And ever since the Cowboys reacquired him, the Cowboys have not appeared in an NFC Championship game. Alex makes fun of the Cowboys because he thinks it's fun. The New England Patriots' worst trade was trading a 2nd round pick for Mohamed Sanu. The Patriots were frustratingly consistent in the Bill Belichick era, except if you ask the people who scout wide receivers for them. N'Keal Harry, Chad Jackson, Aaron Dobson. Objectively, the 2 best wide receivers that Bill Belichick drafted were Super Bowl MVP Deion Branch and Super Bowl MVP / the only reason people remember that Tender Moments exists, Julian Edelman. They had just taken N'Keal Harry in the 1st round in 2019, but their need for receivers was so dire, they gave up a 2nd round pick in 2020 to acquire Mohamed Sanu from the Falcons. No, I'm not here to talk about my boy, especially since Patriots fans were eager at the idea of the greatest quarterback of all time catching passes from Tom Brady. But unfortunately, things just didn't work out for Mohamed Sanu in New England. The Patriots got a mere 207 receiving yards out of Mohamed Sanu, and he was released the following preseason due to injury concerns. Not exactly worth the 2nd round pick in 2020. The New Orleans Saints' worst trade, a 1st and a 3rd for Steve Walsh. Just talked about the Ricky Williams trade in my last video. I would put it up there, but go look there. Instead, let's discuss another trade where the Cowboys made out like the bandits they are. After selecting Troy Aikman 1st overall in 1989, they were just like, oh, I guess we can just trade this other guy then. And then they did. Steve Walsh was about as average as it gets. Walsh went 10-9 through 25 touchdowns and 22 interceptions, while the Cowboys formed even more of their dynasty. They parlayed the 1st round pick they got from the Saints, moved up to number 1 overall in 1991, and selected Russell Maryland. Their 3rd round pick that year was used on an offensive tackle who only made 4 Pro Bowls and was only named an All-Pro 3 times. Eric Williams, you bust. God, I'm so sad. But the Cowboys also got a conditional 2nd round pick from this trade. But did you know that could have led to even more success for the Cowboys had he panned out in Dallas like he really did in Jacksonville? That's right, wide receiver Jimmy Smith. He did not record a single catch in Dallas, but he did have 9 1,000-yard seasons in Jacksonville. So wait, are we done with the Cowboys trading their QBs? Good, thank God. I cannot handle... Wait, no, don't do this. No, don't do this to me. The New York Giants' worst trade was trading 2 premium draft picks for QB Craig Morton. The New York G-men were not very good in the 1970s, and the Craig Morton era was probably the worst of that. The Giants traded 2 premium draft picks for Craig Morton, who was objectively good in Dallas, and the Giants thought they could replicate that success, and wow, they didn't. Craig Morton had an 8-25 record, a TD to interception ratio of 29-49, and boos so loud, you'd think it was an in-stadium bartender who just cut off one of their fans from drinking. He played a large role in the futility of the Bill Arnsparger coaching era, and Giants fans were less than thrilled. Craig Morton was later traded to Denver for Steve Ramsey, and while Craig Morton would revitalize his career in Denver, Ramsey never played it down for the Giants. As for them boys, they got a 2nd overall pick, and that turned into 8-time first-team All-Pro Randy White. I'm so over it. Can I move on? Thank God. The New York Jets' worst trade was trading for Aaron Rodgers. This trade had all of the hype in the world. Aaron Rodgers had back-to-back MVP seasons in 2020 and 2021, but playing QB for the Jets removes you from MVP seasons the way being a president ages you. The Jets acquired Aaron Rodgers and a 2023 fifth-rounder for 2 second-round picks, a 6th-round pick, and all while the Packers moved up to 13th overall and the Jets moved down to 15th overall in the 2023 NFL Draft. Rodgers for this offseason was the ultimate quarterback in name value. ESPN was desperate for the Jets to have Super Bowl hopes that were less than laughable, but you need to remember that these are your New York Jets. They don't do so well with quarterbacks. In the opening game, Aaron Rodgers carried an American flag onto the field to honor 9/11, while a firefighter ran behind him carrying the corpse of Zach Wilson's career. In week 1 of the 2023 season, 4 snaps into his Jets career, Aaron Rodgers ruptured his Achilles. In 2024, he did become the all-time leader in sacks taken. It just did not work out. They tried everything, including hiring Aaron Rodgers' old friends, hitting up receivers that Aaron Rodgers played with, and seeing what wide receivers used to play for the Green Bay Packers. These methods enabled them to bring in Devontae Adams, Alan Lazard, and Randall Cobb to accomplish a common goal, yelling mercilessly at Marquez Valdez-Scantling. With a healthy Aaron Rodgers, the Jets went 5-12, Robert Saleh was fired, and they're right back to being desperate for a new franchise quarterback once again. The Philadelphia Eagles' worst trade was trading LaShawn McCoy for Kiko Alonso. There is an honorable mention trade that I have to mention here. It's probably worse, but I didn't bring it up because there was no info on it. In the 1970s, the Eagles acquired a QB named Greg Barton. The trade was so bad there was no information on the trade other than the fact that it happened. Greg Barton attempted 1 pass ever, and it was with the Lions. Now let's go a little bit more modern for a trade that has a little bit more tea, shall we? Chip Kelly wanted to control his team and cut money, so he got rid of veteran running back LaShawn McCoy and traded for his old Oregon drinking buddy Kiko Alonso. LaShawn McCoy promptly put up 4 solid seasons in Buffalo, while Kiko Alonso was off the team after 1 year due to injuries and their desire to trade up for Carson Wentz in 2016. It wasn't all bad though, as things seemed to work out for the Eagles in the immediate aftermath. They won a Super Bowl in the 2017-2018 season after cutting their losses with worse Nick Bosa. The Pittsburgh Steelers' worst trade was trading quarterback Len Dawson. The Steelers have been annoyingly competent when it comes to making trades. Hell, even the 5th-round pick they got for Santonio Holmes in a roundabout way turned into Antonio Brown. However, when you trade a quarterback who played in the first ever Super Bowl and won Super Bowl IV, it's gotta be on the list. The Steelers had Milwaukee's best Platinum Rewards member Bobby Lane on their roster, so it was up to them to manage him. They traded away Len Dawson and Gern Nagler in exchange for Junior Wren, a defensive back, and Preston Carter, who was a decently successful pass catcher. The Steelers struggled a bit in the 1960s, particularly after Bobby Lane retired to a life of drinking like a Steelers fan. Long term, even though Preston Carter was solid with the Steelers, the Len Dawson trade was probably one they'd have back. The 49ers' worst trade was trading 5 draft picks for O.J. Simpson. The trade up for Trey Lance should be here, but Brock Purdy absolutely saved their keisters, and I'm trying not to do trade ups. But also, Trey Lance was acquired for only 4 draft picks. O.J. Simpson, meanwhile, was acquired for 5 draft picks, including one of those picks being the first overall pick in 1979. That's the one that takes the cake for a player who was active at the time. O.J. Simpson had a lot of wear and tear, and he was declining and murdering. 1977 was a down year for O.J. Simpson, as in 7 games played, he had 557 rushing yards, no touchdowns, and also no murders. He was then traded to the San Francisco 49ers after his down year. The 49ers gave up a 2nd and 3rd round draft pick in 1978, a bloody glove, a 1st and 4th round pick in 1979, a blue knit cap, a 2nd round pick in 1980, and a Jewish waiter to be named later. O.J. Simpson just couldn't get his career back on track in San Francisco, and ultimately his injuries caught up to him. After 2 seasons of putting up meager stats and having chronic knee issues, he retired. There were a couple saving graces for this trade in San Francisco. The 49ers drafted Joe Montana in the 3rd round in 1979. As for the Bills, they swung and missed on all their draft picks that they got for OJ. You know who didn't swing and miss, though? O.J. Simpson in his drive. The Seattle Seahawks' worst trade was their trade for Jamal Adams. Jamal Adams had a Seahawks-like career with the Jets and a Jets-like career for the Seahawks. Even though his Jets career didn't end so well, he pissed off a lot of people in the Jets building. He wanted that contract extension. He talked shit about Adam Gase and GM Joe Douglas. He even made a list of teams he wanted to be traded to: the Cowboys, the Ravens, the Texans, the Chiefs, the Eagles, the 49ers, and the team he would ultimately get traded to, the Seattle Seahawks. He even allegedly cried tears of joy when he found out he was going to be traded to the Seahawks. The Jets gave up their prized safety and got 2 first-round picks and a 3rd-round pick in return. Those 2 first-round picks eventually became cornerstones of the Jets roster in the mid-2020s as they got guard Elijah Vera Tucker, who is now with the Patriots, and they got Garrett Wilson, who now daydreams about a life playing for the Patriots. Jamal Adams had a great first season for the Seahawks, recording 9.5 sacks and earning 2nd-team All-Pro honors. Unfortunately, things fell off a cliff almost immediately. Injuries piled up. He didn't have a single sack again in his Seahawks career. Things just didn't work out, and he was released after the 2023 season. In 2024 and 2025, Jamal Adams spent time with the Titans, Lions, and Raiders. The Tampa Bay Bucks' worst trade was a 1st and a 3rd-round pick for Darrelle Revis. Now, this isn't necessarily the fault of Darrelle Revis. He had a really good season in Tampa, but he just wasn't a good fit for their system, and he was let go after only 1 season. Revis was acquired in 2013 for a 1st-round pick and a conditional 3rd-round pick. But like I said, he was only there for 1 year, and while he himself was good, the team was awful. And after he left, they got even worse. Even with that 1st-round pick being in the absolute wasteland that was the 2013 NFL draft, the Jets did manage to find a Pro Bowler in defensive tackle Sheldon Richardson, because a blind squirrel finds a nut sometimes, even during a famine. The Tennessee Titans', or technically Houston Oilers' worst trade, was trading Ken Houston to Washington. Trading away A.J. Brown for a 1st-round pick is an obvious honorable mention here. The Titans altered the course of their franchise and traded away a legitimate wide receiver 1 for a 1st-round pick that would end up being used on a glorified Mitchell Tinsley. That reference will make exactly 0 sense in about 6 years. Now, I specifically chose the Ken Houston trade for a couple reasons. It resulted in a return package that could not have mattered less in the grand scheme of things. And in return, Ken Houston went to 7 straight Pro Bowls in Washington. Perhaps worst of all, or best of all in this case, and yes, I am doing this one video too late, this was the nail in the coffin for the real worst head coach in Tennessee Titans / Houston Oilers history, Bill Peterson. The early 1970s Oilers were a beacon of futility. Their trade of Ken Houston was honestly for the best. Houston needed to be freed from, well, Houston. Ken Houston was a remarkable player, but the Oilers were a disaster, particularly during the Bill Peterson era. Losing Houston made things go from worst to worster for the Oilers as they completely unraveled. And finally, Washington's worst trade, a 2nd and a 4th-round pick for Donovan McNabb. This much for a guy who didn't know that ties exist? Good God. The trade-up for RG3 could have been on this list, but again, I want to eliminate trade-ups as much as I can, and he was incredible until he got hurt and was mismanaged afterwards. Now, 2010 was a strange year for the Campbell's chunky aficionado. He was shipped from Philly to Washington for a 2nd and a 4th-round pick, and those picks turned into decent rotational pieces for the Eagles. That wasn't a major price to pay for Donovan McNabb, but decent draft capital, and what happened after he joined Washington made this trade suck for them. McNabb got handed a 5-year contract extension with Washington, but 1 month and 2 days later, after that contract extension, he was benched and made the 3rd-string QB of the team. He ended the year with more picks than TDs, and he was traded to Minnesota for a 2012 6th-round pick, which ended up actually being Alfred Morris. So there you go, guys. You got bailed out. Well, that'll do it for this video. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Again, thank you guys. I've had a lot of new subscribers of late. I'm very excited about all of that. But if you haven't already, give this video a like and subscribe to the channel for the sexiest sports content on the internet. But for now, stay tuned for more sports content that you didn't ask for.